Welcome to the LATAM MedTech Leaders Podcast, a conversation with leaders who have succeeded or plan to succeed in Latin America. Please subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, etc. Today, our guest is Charlie Webb. Charlie is a Six Sigma Master Black Belt, patented inventor, and medical device packaging guru. I didn't know there was such a thing, Charlie, but Charlie is the founder and president of Stahl Scientific, a medical device packaging and testing machine provider. Charlie has been in sterile device packaging for 26 years and has been involved in numerous FDA and ISO audits as a regulatory advisor. So, Charlie, it's great to have you here in the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor to be here.
Awesome, Charlie. So let's start talking about your involvement with Latin America, Charlie. How is it that you got connected with the region from a personal, professional level?
Well, like a lot of U.S. companies, we developed a relationship with Mexico primarily. There's an advantage, right, when you're next door neighbors to enter into Latin America because there's a certain amount of crossover in terms of culture. The cultural differences between, ironically, Brazil and Mexico are quite different. And so I guess the Mexican Americans are used to us, we're used to them, and we have a very good relationship. And because of the proximity for logistic reasons and so forth, you can imagine, Mexico is a great choice for us for medical device manufacturing. But we've worked with several countries in Latin America, Chile, Argentina, Colombia, and we've struggled along with them as they are sort of reaching out to offer products to the U.S. and also looking at being sort of a partner with the U.S. in terms of developing medical devices. That I think one of the biggest challenges for Latin American countries that are wishing to work in the States is there is kind of a disconnect between regulatory requirements, and trying to bridge that gap has become a challenge for these companies. The FDA has mandates on how medical devices must be made, obviously, that are entering into the U.S. airspace, we'll call it. And but with ISO, the international standard, that obviously, when they can conform to ISO, it makes that bridge into the U.S. market better. But principally, we are helping a lot of Latin American companies develop a sterile packaging process that's commensurate to the high levels. And we have a process, the ISO 11607, and that's the requirement for getting a sterile device into the hospitals and clinics. And so that process has become much more robust this year, as of last year, actually. And so now a lot of countries are struggling to get on board and to become ISO certified. And so we help to kind of bridge the gap to say, hey, it has to be done this way. And there can be challenges because obviously there's cultural and management style difference that we have to address.
Yes. Good, Charlie. So let's talk about some trends that you're seeing in Latin America, political, economic, disease trends that are relevant to our discussion today.
Well, in fact, I was just researching this morning, looks in Latin America, there's a huge increase in sort of non-infectious diseases that are affecting Latin American cancer, cardiovascular disease. And these are going to represent somewhere in the order of 80% of the mortalities. So obviously getting into preventative medicine and devices that help prolong life. For instance, arterial stents in the U.S. have been a game changer. For people who have had blocked arteries, say 50 years ago, the diagnosis wasn't very well, but now we can get in and we can open up arteries and we can shore them up with arterial stents, and it's been a life change because a lot of diets now are changing worldwide, changing outcomes in terms of cancers. And so now, I guess, a lot of other countries that historically weren't faced with uh, obesity and those sort of issues that are sort of the headwater to cancer and cardiovascular disease are now struggling to get up to pace in terms of treatment options. Now that McDonald's are in every corner worldwide, you can grab a bag of French fries everywhere. I mean, you even see it. I've spent the last 30 years traveling to, or 20, yeah, about 30 years now, traveling to Japan. I've spent a great deal of time in Japan, and you can see that the people are getting taller there. And
Taller.
yeah,
Wow.
I remember when I used to go, that were the Japanese were famously shorter
Yeah.
people, but because of the change in diet, you're starting to see even countries who hold very closely to a cultural diet are now adopting a Western, some might even call an American palate
Yes.
and diet. And as a result of
Yeah.
that, those are growing. So Latin America is now faced with a similar problem where we have to look at how we can develop devices for Latin America, as well as what are the export options. So those are one of the trends that we see that's happening in Latin America. In the United States, the trends, as I mentioned before, we're starting to get more robust regulatory requirements to get a device in. So a lot of countries wishing to enter into the United States are having to meet these robust regulatory hurdles. So it really pays. In fact, it's interesting that in the United States we are in a little bit of a human resource drought, you might say, on the engineering side. You could go into any clean room in North America or any medical device company in the United States and Canada, and it's very likely there'll be several Indian nationals that are working in the engineer team. So what the Indians on a personal level understood was that science, engineering, mathematics has become an area of study that has helped them. And you can see the similar trend in Latin America where, you know, no longer can Mexico, for instance, be the low dollar place to come and get something made. I mean, at one point you cap out in terms of being a contractor of other people's intellectual property. So the goal and the hope for Mexico and Latin America as a whole is to be able to develop that intellectual resource where they're developing their own technology and not just brokering or assembling in most cases. You ask about our political climate. It's hard not to look into the news and see our border crisis, right? So, what our border crisis is telling the world, and this is something that Latin America really needs to look at. I mean, why is there such a movement from humanoids from south to north? And the answer is pretty clear. It's lifestyle, right? We all want a better lifestyle. But the interesting part, I'm on a camp where several other people are on this same camp, is our goal isn't to close the walls on Mexico. We do have a problem with the Mexican border where we cannot just bring everyone in the world because it collapses an economy, right? So that's an unfair way to enter into a country. No one is arguing that. But what it's telling us is that a better way for Latin America, certainly Mexico in this analog, would be to develop a China model, an India model, where they first become the contract packagers for US products, not medicine, but US products in general. Um, no matter how you want to spin it politically, there's a low cost labor pool south of our border. That's why we export assembly. And logistically, it's so much better. It's so surprising to me. Why are we shipping containers from China when we have a economic economy would allow us to be able to do this in Mexico and South America. So, but I think a lot of it, there's a pushback. I think in Latin America, where it's like, hey, we've got things to sell as well. We have the intellectual resources to make our own product, and I think we're almost in a little bit of a stalemate right now. In the case of Mexico, they've although the Mexican connection with the United States, I think, is becoming much stronger. But here's how the evolution works. You're roughly in my age category there, so we all remember that when we get things from Japan as a child in the '60s, Japanese products were just of very low quality. I mean, it's hard for us to imagine a low quality Japanese product when you look at reliability indexes of a Toyota. some of the highest quality, some of the they're using Kaizen and Six Sigma manufacturing methods, and they're brokeraging, exploiting, if you like, their cultural makeup to be able to make incredible products. So what we see, and now we see it in China, and Japan's quite worried because when we think of China over the last 10 years, we don't think of stellar, beautifully built product. Right? We're thinking lowest bidder, the low hanging fruit stuff. So that's where we can see these paradigms that can change. What I believe is going to happen at one point, Mexico, which has been the low dollar provider of labor, is going to get those intellectual resources sort of developed. And what's going to happen is they're going to be known for better products. There's a long way to go for sure, but I think that is the trend that look, India is in a similar model, and we're approaching a 10 billion something world population right now. So it's surprising that we're there. Again, looking at some the International Monetary Fund says that the world economy grew by 5.2% in 2021. Emerging countries or somewhere in the order of 6%, and Latin America is at 3.6. So Latin America has some catching up to do, and there's I mean, since colonial times for South America, there's challenges. There's even geographical challenges. There's political differences, and so it's challenging for there to be this sort of European Union model. It has to come ultimately, I think, and I think that's where the direction ultimately is going to go. There has to be that sort of collective of united countries that are going to codify these quality measures and allow only the best that Latin America has to offer to gate through a portal to the rest of the world. That's what I believe needs to happen.
Well said, Charlie. Yeah, I like those comments. The Pacific Alliance is something that is addressing that exactly what you're discussing here. I think is the only initiative that really will place Latin America as a world class um, place. I mean, at least the four countries that are part of the Pacific Alliance are a trade bloc, a world class trade bloc in the world, which will make about 200 and something million people, and it will be considered about the eighth economy in the world. And
Right.
just for listeners to make sure we're on the same page here, the Pacific Alliance is the trade bloc that Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Chile have put together, and these are the only OECD countries in Latin America. And the good news is that the trade bloc is expanding with Panama and Costa Rica. Costa Rica just got accepted into the OECD a few weeks ago, which is great news. And these are countries that are aligned with international best practices, international policies, and they're open for business. So I think,
Terrific.
yeah,
Well, I think, a
eventually.
lot of times, Latin America is marginalized for, capability. I mean, when you're looking at Mexico, Colombia, Chile, and Argentina represent the largest economy. They have a somewhere in the order of $4.25 trillion. I mean, the same thing with India. We sort of underestimated what India can do, and I think India 10 years from now is going to have a completely different meaning. Obviously, China is in a very sort of a time of flux. So these things are happening much quickly than they used to. These were usually on 25-year sort of timelines. I think we're going to see things happen much more quickly. And who gets involved? I mean, I think we saw with the EU how the shakedown went. Some countries they wanted to participate, that didn't want to participate. Some they wanted in, some they regret putting in. I mean, there were some issues in terms of Greece and so forth. So, we there's going to be a shift with that alliance as well. But I really think in the interim, the companies that are willing to start to get up to speed in terms of world processes are going to make that transition much easier, because even though there will be a requirement in South America for quality, and there'll be a value system and all of the need to put together in order to gate these products with the quality that the world requires now. there are a lot of companies are getting heads up on this, and it's important that they do. I mean, I would encourage any medical device manufacturer in Latin America to start the process of getting an FDA 1345 designation, or um, I'm sorry, an ISO 13485 designation, and working towards that quality standard. Because when you start working towards these quality standards and you peek into the United States, I mean, a lot of countries still look at us as sort of the standard of care in terms of devices. Although I would argue that the EU now
with
has
the UMDR.
Yep. UMDR has driven these requirements beyond what the US is doing. And a lot of companies in the US are having the same struggle. We're struggling to become compliant to that new European standard or value system. And although we're very close, you can imagine on less developed countries working under a different model have to really get up to speed quickly because the world is moving very fast in this. Again, our population is exploding. We need to provide good, cogent care to billions of people in order to be able to perform this on the magnitude that's needed. The good news, the bad news about what we've done is we've done an amazing job worldwide of creating a lifestyle that supports the procreation of humans, the proliferation of foodstuffs. We've done an amazing job with that. But like every species of animal, we grow to the food supply. So the food supply is big, shelter is there, and so we continue to grow. But now we have new challenges. I mean, none of us can argue with the pandemic that we have infectious disease issues that are going to blossom again. We certainly have not seen the last of that. Um, I think if anything, that was just a quick peek in to what could come. Something that's airborne that is much more deadly would devastate the world, and so we have to be positioned worldwide. We all have to be on the same page, obviously, for us to meet these challenges. And I think some countries are doing a better job than others. But when we try to work with some of the companies that historically in Latin America, it's our own, I'll be this somewhat colloquial. They were behind in what our requirements would be, and we had to help them bridge that gap. Um, but in fairness, they're at the starting gate oftentimes, and I mean, they have some of the products that are coming from Latin America are amazing devices. I mean, they're doing respirators, and I believe Brazil is huge right tons of very unique, very well built devices that would benefit the world, and they're being firewalled by the regulatory hurdles to get these devices in distribution. So obviously, the goal is to bridge that intellectual gap. The ability to do quick deploy and to build these products in Latin America is quite proven. I mean, if you look at consumer goods, even coming out of Mexico, the U.S. has moved several plants. Freightliner, I believe Ford has there's so many factories that are down there. But when you look at the management core there, it's principally Americans. And so what needs to happen is that they need to take this model as the Japanese did and ultimately the Chinese and realize that, we have to have the intellectual resources first and not go for the low-hanging fruit of how many shovelfuls of product can you get out the door. That's not a strategy that grows a company, and it's certainly not a strategy that builds a nation for sure.
Hmm. Well said, Charlie. Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about specifics in Latin America. What countries would you consider are the manufacturing hubs in Latin America? Mexico, Costa Rica, any other country that we can talk about?
Yeah, I mean, Costa Rica and Mexico is where we're seeing. They're probably 10 years ahead of Chile and Argentina in terms of what I've experienced.
Okay,
Again, a lot of it has to do with logistics. Proximity makes a difference.
sure.
And so we also have a better cultural connection. If you were to take an American and a Canadian in a pub and you're drinking beer together, it would be an hour before you realize who's Canadian and who's American. We're
Yeah.
so close in terms of who we are. I mean, when I travel abroad, are you American or you're Canadian? I mean, we're almost a
Yeah.
thing. Now, if you
Yeah.
ask a Canadian, they'd be like, "No, we're different." And you ask an American, "No." But when you look at, again, the regulatory differences for us to be able to send through their health ministry, we have hurdles with with a country that we almost exactly share a value system with, that we almost exactly share television, language, everything. So you can imagine when there's a language difference and a stronger cultural difference, that those barriers become very real. And some of them, which are much more subtle, is the barriers between an American company or Americans with, say, Argentina or Chile or Brazil or Colombia versus Central America or Mexico. We're much closer to understanding each other by virtue of us being closer together. So, I think that that's one of the challenges as you go deeper into South America. You're losing proximity, and you're losing some of that cultural connection that we've developed by a century of our connectivity with Mexico. We also have, through the maquiladora, through the um, or NAFTA at one point, we had the ability to sort of grease the skids in terms of how we trade with Mexico. So an encouragement to work with Mexico, but there really wasn't, it wasn't politicized, it wasn't incentivized for us to work with, say, Argentina. So as a result of that, and also when you get into deeper political difference from Argentina and the United States, it becomes much more problematic. Those political differences have always been a struggle when you're trying to import products from a country that is vastly different than the value system or the prevailing backbone political structure. It's very difficult to do that. With Mexico, the political difference is mild enough, you might say, for us to be able to overcome that, for us to work with them. It becomes much more challenging with Argentina, for instance. So even Colombia to a certain extent. So I think, the real challenge, again, moving forward, is for us to somehow bridge the cultural gap, which is fairly obvious that that needs to happen, and to sort of mainstream what it means to work with these other nations, because it would seem very, for the average American company, it would seem quite odd to trade with Colombia, for instance. Would just be odd for us, you know what I mean? So, we have a hard time, and although I wouldn't say necessarily that Americans are nationalistic, or xenophobic, but I do believe that we do have a reluctance to work with things that are foreign to us. I mean, I don't know if you watch The Simpsons. One of the episodes it was funny when they were selling falafels. They had to rename them Crunch Patties to be more acceptable to Americans, right? So, I think there's another one there where he was bringing home tacos to Mr. Burns, and he said, "I told you, no ethnic food." So it's Americans are not as international in many ways, despite us being somewhat advanced in a lot of ways. We tend to look inward as Americans. We look at us as the gold standard. When we see things that aren't the same of us, we're uncomfortable with us. As you know, we're famously struggling still, hundreds of years into working with other nationalities and races. We still struggle with it. We should be so on the other end of this by now. So that mild xenophobic vista that Americans have, it's unfortunately up to the exporter, these other countries, to be able to recreate a vision of, normalize it, if you like. When you look at state of California through the state's Chamber of Commerce, runs ads in other states to talk about California, talk about it until it becomes normal to want to visit California. And similarly, you have to have some sort of a campaign underwritten by a nation or a group of nations to be able to. I mean, if you go to the trade show, the Medical Device and Manufacturing Trade Show, which we hold out here, it's coming up in August this year. Um, about every other booth is another state that's encouraging California companies to move to
Interesting.
work with them.
Okay.
So
Uh,
they're trying to talk about the benefits of working with, say, Texas. What are the economic benefits? What are the cultural business benefits? What are the lifestyle benefits for your employees? What is the intellectual resources that you could expect to have if you were to work with that? So other countries obviously have been doing this for some time. There's a international pavilion typically at these trade shows, and you can visit and talk to them. Typically, those are to have the discussion about exporting products or working with them in some way. So it's nothing new. This has been going on 20, 30 years that I've
yeah.
observed. Um, but I think there needs to be a bigger push through other media channels, not just the B2B industrial side. We almost have to normalize these relationships to the rank and file, to the average Joe on the street, if you like. We
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
need to understand that,
Mm.
I mean, there was a survey about 10 years ago, and they said that the average high school graduate couldn't identify Europe on a world map.
What?
So, we're very different than, and I don't know if that's a testament to poor education, or again, if it's that just sort of lack of interest on things outside of your zone of interest. So, we have to, it's up to, again, these countries to be able to, or in Latin America as a whole, to be able to normalize, to be able to broadcast the story, understand our
Yeah.
culture. We want to work with people that we know. I mean, when we're dealing with, I work with a group of people. I mean, most of us are on LinkedIn now, right? If you're going to LinkedIn and you develop connections, that is a place, it's the Facebook of commerce, is a place
Yes.
for us to develop a relationship that we can parlay that relationship after we understand that person, what they offer. We can now parlay that relationship into a business relationship. So LinkedIn has been a very, very important to that. So I think we should all take a page out of LinkedIn's story and say that, well, if the flow of commerce means let's first develop a relationship that we feel comfortable with, and then let's take that relationship once we understand who you are and what you do and what your value system is, and then let's talk about business. So that, I think, is the duty of Latin America moving forward, is understand us as a culture, a people, our capabilities, what our goal is, what our value structure looks like, what our infrastructure looks like, and then let's get busy and do business together. So I think that's going to be really the challenge moving forward. Maybe not so much of a challenge, it's certainly the duty moving forward, I believe, of Latin America, in order to really be the president of the world war market that certainly Latin America hopes to gain.
Agree, Charlie. Yes, yes. You are right on point. In the case of Colombia specifically, that is, of course, the country that I follow the most. That's where I focus most of my efforts, and that's where I'm from. I see the Colombian government pushing a lot on what they call a near-shoring strategy, trying to bring, during the Trump government, the issue with China became a very hot topic, and a lot of companies were reevaluating their China strategy, manufacturing strategy. So the Colombian government was trying to position the country as a great substitute to
Right.
to China. So they have this strategy called nearshoring strategy, and they started doing ads and meetings all over the United States, trying to bring companies back to Latin America, to Colombia. And because at the beginning of NAFTA, there was a big push to do manufacturing in Mexico. Then China came along, and people started going to China, and now we have this nearshoring initiative coming in Latin America. The other thing is that for Latin Americans, Mexico is part of the region. It's part of Latin America. It's actually, when you go to school in Latin America, I was taught in high school in Colombia that Mexico was Central America, was part of us. But in the US, Mexico is
North
North
America.
America.
I know,
Yeah.
isn't that
So
funny? Yeah.
it has a totally different connotation. So it's
Yeah,
like a North American fellow country, even though they speak a different language, but they're North America. and we share so
It's
many
good.
things in common.
Yeah.
I mean,
You know,
from the U.S. standpoint, yeah, Mexico used to own California, they used to own Nevada, they used to own all these. So Mexico is kind of part of the American history.
yeah,
So
agreed.
it's probably easier to relate as an American relate to Mexico rather than
I think
relating to
funny,
Colombia.
a lot of Mexicans, where when California was part of Mexico, they still refer to it almost
Yes.
jokingly, Alta California.
Yes, agreed.
And
Yes.
so as in Alta California myself, it's funny because there, if you're a Southern California, I mean, you can see I'm a Dutch guy, right? By looking at me, most of us are from German descent. We're Europeans, we're Irish and Scottish, and so what's an American mean? But um, it's a question, I guess, of geography, versus language. As geography, certainly Mexico is a North American nation in our vista, but in terms of culture, we see them much more Latin American, obviously. But you're right. I do think that because they're our next door neighbor, they're part of this continent. Then we obviously look at them as sort of a distant cousin. Now, obviously, Canadians have a very different root because they're made of the same people, and then there's Puerto Rico. We have that little piece that we have to look at where we are at one point, is Puerto Rico going to be the 51st state? What's going to happen there? We can't bring, can we bring in a piece to the American pie that isn't native speaking English? A lot of challenges like that make the movement of goods and people challenging. But you're right. It's kind of a gray area in Mexico, but and maybe that's why, as you say, it's probably easier to deal with because they feel very much our neighbors. Most of us vacation down there, and as I say, if you're a Southern Californian, like my wife and I are raised here, but she's German, I'm Dutch and Irish, but no one knows how to make a better taco than my wife does because if you're if you're a Californian, you're Mexican. I mean, when was raised in San Bernardino, and I thought I was Mexican until I was about 12 years old because all of my friends were Mexican. So we're very integrated here, and so as a result of that, we're used to, they're our friends, we know them, they're relatives oftentimes. So it's something that is much easier for us to deal with. But when you talk about past the Panama Canal and beyond, things start to change for us. It's funny how there's sort of a zeitgeist of an era when it comes to countries. Now, I'm old enough, I'm 62 years old. So I remember Colombia meaning coffee, the Colombian coffee, everything, the best coffee in the world, coffee, coffee, coffee. And that was on commercials. But then as you move into the 80s, Colombia meant the best marijuana you can get in California. It's just so it, that's where things become a little bit tricky, is that depending on the age of the person, whether they're a baby boomer, a millennial, a Gen Xer, they're going to have a different view of a
Mm,
region
great
based on
point.
the
Yes.
zeitgeist when they were raised. And so, we hear Colombian drug lords, I hear
Yes.
Columbia
And
coffee.
Netflix is not helping much.
No, exactly, right? So I think it's important to remember that whether we like it or not, we have the human rhythm of people with their prejudice. Call them what you like, but these are prejudice. Maybe not even so much prejudice. It's more of a cultural understanding that they have of a nation, and that is going to change. I mean, right now, China used to just mean bad
Yeah.
merchandise to us.
Yeah.
Now it means a political problem, trying to take over the world. Now they're, and cheap product. So they've got a long ways to go in order to change what I would call a very challenging PR problem for China right now.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I think we all have to understand how people see what their worldview is, and for us to understand, how can we better shape, not spin, but how can we shape the story of our nation to where we address the problems that we may have had in the past. Let's don't ignore them. Let's not forget what the world may see us as. Let's work with that. Let's try to reshape, again, not to respin. Let's reshape that, who we are, and that is the entryway, the porta coming into.
Puerta.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, we have to have that gate to come in, and there's a certain amount of things that we have to do in order for us to be accepted, worldwide. The U.S. has. If when I travel to Europe, sometimes I almost want to put a Canadian flag on me because everybody thinks Americans are loud and obnoxious, and so I try to be
Yeah.
very quiet. But there's always truth in these little beliefs. I mean, anytime you go worldwide, you can always hear a loud group of people. It's Americans, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
always.
Agree.
So
Mhm.
we have kind of an image that is warranted, and it's behavior. But maybe we need to respin our story that we're just exuberant, happy people. Maybe that's the PR problem, right?
Americans are happy people, by the way. They're very friendly. Very,
Yeah,
very
I mean,
friendly.
worldwide, I think they're the
Yeah.
friendliest people for
Yeah.
sure. So, but we do, I think, in the case of countries and coming out, we do have to address the potential of xenophobia. How a culture, and particularly in the United States, we're very slow to take on other cultures. We're much more comfortable with crunch patties than falafels, and that's our problem. We have to, we're still a burger and fry nation. We talk about America being the melting pot. But that's not really the case. I mean,
It's
certainly in
not.
Europe,
Yeah.
that's much more of a case, or in big cities in the United States.
Yeah.
But we're still,
Mhm.
and I don't have a problem with that. I believe I was very frustrated when Europe changed into the euro from the unique monies when I travel,
Yes.
because I
Exactly.
love the uniqueness of a country. And what I'm saying is I don't believe anyone should detune their culture in order to fit in with the world commerce. I'm just saying that make your culture palatable to a world
Yeah.
market, and
Yeah.
to make sure that you allow people the opportunity to get to know you. So I think, with the Pacific Alliance, the challenge maybe coming out of the gate is an introduction to the world and what's capable. What are the fantastic things that are happening? How can we help? Those are the sort of things that are really going to be asked, I think, as the headwater moving into the world market.
Excellent, Charlie. I love your comments. Very wise, by the way. So, Charlie, we're close to the end of the show. And the question I always ask my guests towards the end of the show is, what would be your muscles of wisdom? What would be your words of wisdom if you had the CEO of a US company looking at Latin America as a place to do clinical trials, commercialize medical technologies, or manufacture devices? So what would be your how would you summarize your wisdom to him or her?
Well, I think really we're seeing a lot more attendance. Before, we would see a trickle of attendance to these the trade shows in the medical device industry, and they would come in, they would shake hands, meet a few people, they would take a few notes, and they would retreat quickly back to their desks. I think really, in order to understand the market you're going to sell, just like any relationship, the relationship needs to have a higher level of understanding. I would encourage someone who is and we've seen other companies have done this strategy, is to stay in the United States, or your targeted market, for a month's time, visit vendors, take tours of facility, find out how clean rooms are configured, what are the challenges in the U.S. market, because I think it's probably not a great idea to try to enter into a market with already fraught with challenges, when of just that connection from one country to another, until you understand the challenges that we have domestically. So when you understand what the U.S. companies, medical device manufacturers, are up against in terms of regulatory hurdles, right now we're in the middle of a human crisis, a human talent crisis. So how are these companies managing those challenges? And when you look at it from the vista of a medical device manufacturer in the United States, it makes you much more empathetic on how your approach, what your marketing strategies are going to be coming into the US. So, forgetting all about the cultural differences, the regulatory issues of coming in, let's pretend your company is a US company and you have to start that business now. That is going to give you the deepest amount of insight, in my opinion.
Perfect, Charlie. Thank you so much for being a guest in our show.
Awesome.
I look forward to being in touch. I'm sure listeners got a lot out of your wisdom.
I hope so. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure. Que passe
Thank you,
um
Charlie.
bom dia.